Released in 1941, this film, co-written, starring, and was the directorial debut for Orson Welles, tops the American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Movies list in 1998 and the updated list in 2007. Many critics still hold this film to be the greatest film of all time. Today on You've Never Seen It, we have Citizen Kane. Welcome to You've Never Seen It, an audio podcast where I, your host, Allison Salamone, am on a journey to never have to hear these 4 words again. Joining me today is someone who is a beast, wink wink, when it comes to movie trivia. You can read his reviews over on The Wrap. He also co-hosts the critically acclaimed network, and he has a pretty stellar soap business. Please welcome to You've Never Seen It, Mr. William Bibbiani. Hi, Bibbs.
Hi. Yes, thank you for throwing all the roses. Thank you. The thorns welcome. Hurt a little bit, but it's nice. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited you're here. It's so funny when I keep telling people that I'm recording episodes and I'm doing this whole project, and they ask, who do I have lined up or who do I have coming on? And they say, oh, I'm going to be recording with William Bibbiani. And they say, oh, what are you doing? I go, and I tell them Citizen Kane. They all go, oh, that's a great guess for that one. And I'm like, good, he chose it.
I'm flattered they have any idea who I am. Honestly, that's really, really nice.
We try. But yeah, no, I'm so excited you're here. First and foremost, I guess, even kind of before getting into the real meat and potatoes of all of this stuff, what is kind of your background and what was it that got you into movies and doing what you're doing, and why Citizen Kane?
Well, that's a good question. And, it's a long story. I'm 40 years old. I could take you through a whole process. But in a nutshell, I was always fascinated by film and television growing up as a child. But I was interested in kid stuff. I was watching Spider-Man and I was watching X-Men cartoons and such. And it got to the point where every week we would go rent movies at our local movie hut. It was called The Warehouse. It was spelled with a W-H-E-R-E. Where? The Warehouse.
The Warehouse. So love a good play on words.
I know. Sadly long since gone, but it was a pretty major chain for a while there. And I would always rent this kid stuff. And then finally my mom, bless her heart, got really sick and tired of having to sit through Rude Dog and the Dweebs for the 3rd time. So she was like, okay, I'll make you a deal. You can rent this video next time if this time we watch some of my movies. And we rented we rented Strangers on a Train by Alfred Hitchcock. We rented Mrs. Miniver, Academy Award for Best Picture, and we rented Citizen Kane. And I was like 9 or 10. And
what a movie for a 9 or 10-year-old.
It's a hell of a thing. But let me tell you something. I watched it as a 9/10-year-old. And I was absolutely enchanted and fascinated. I loved every minute of all 3 of those movies. Those are all great films. And I didn't really go back to renting a lot of like kids' cartoons for a while there. I mean, I have nothing against children's cartoons, but I started really sort of chomping my way through the Warehouse's classic cinema section. And that's kind of where it started. I just all of a sudden had this big crash course in classic film, and I realized that all the things that I had loved had this precedent, had all of these incredible movies that came before and inspired them directly or indirectly. All of the exciting motion picture techniques and styles that I was really enjoying had begun decades, and in some cases over a century, before we got to know them. And so from there was no looking back, or rather there was no looking, well, I was always looking back. I was looking at film history. But from there was no going back to just casually consuming movies. I was absolutely riveted by the entirety of the medium, and that was that basically. I went to film school, kicked around the industry for a little bit, and then I finally realized that what I really enjoyed doing was discussing film, sort of introducing film to people who were new to it or didn't understand the full context of history, or maybe looked down on certain genres, and I could find a way to hopefully introduce it to them so that they would be excited about and appreciate it. And yeah, so covering something like Citizen Kane is really important to me. Not just personally, because I care very deeply about this movie. I've seen it many times, and it's one of my favorites. But I think it's also really, really important for film critics, and I don't think enough of us actively do this. We need to be reintroducing films of the past to people in the present. And a lot of movies in the past don't hold up as well as we might like, because attitudes were different. Representation was lacking, to say the least. Some of them, the movies that are considered or had been considered classics for many decades, are almost unwatchable now because the attitudes are in them. But there is definitely a large supply of great movies that are absolutely entertaining and enchanting today, that I think anyone can appreciate now, with at the very least just a little bit of context. And I think it is a responsibility of a film critic to help people discover those movies. And if those movies aren't like readily accessible, or if people watch them and go, I don't understand why that was a big deal, we need to be able to explain, here's why that was the coolest thing in the universe, and here was how that directly connects to the things you love. So I think that is kind of a solemn responsibility, but I also love doing it. And so here we are talking about Citizen Kane, a movie which a lot of people love, and I know a few people find a little impenetrable, and I get it, and I'm here to help.
I can definitely see where the divisiveness falls. I'm really excited about doing this project and doing these shows and talking about movies, especially movies like Citizen Kane, because of with myself, I'm surprised I haven't watched it sooner,
Hmm,
considering my favorite film of all time is Casablanca. So I
nice.
love classic films. Um, and it, obviously a little bit different in
Oh, they're
tone
different
between
films.
the two,
They're different
but
films.
I just I it's one of those movies I've heard about my entire life, and it's always been either like a joke or just gets brought up for different things. Or anytime you bring up Orson Welles, it's either people bringing up Citizen Kane, at least in my circle, or War of the Worlds,
Yeah,
the radio show that made everyone think the world was ending in 1938 because he was so good.
yeah.
So I I'm glad I'm finally getting to see it. I also kind of wish I saw it sooner because I feel like there was a little bit tainted for me, because I know that there was something about Rosebud, so I spent the whole movie trying to figure out what it was, and then I got
Ah.
the reveal and I was like, "Oh,
Well,
okay."
I mean that it's not like The Sixth Sense where it
Right.
completely like
I've
it
been
should
spoiled.
reinterpret what you've seen before, but it's a thematic reveal. It's not like a
Yeah.
big plot thing. I think Citizen Kane is sometimes a victim of its own success. When the movie came out, it was not a success. It was a thinly veiled biographical picture about William Randolph Hearst, and it
Right.
combined him with a few other similar monarchs of industry from the era. And William Randolph Hearst was in control of a major media empire. And because William Randolph Hearst thought the film was not very flattering to him, and it is not, he basically almost prevented it from being released at all. And then he refused to let any of his papers even mention its existence. So it barely made an impact when it came out. It got some good reviews. It won a Academy Award, but it wasn't considered like a popular choice at the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about 10 years later that the French film critic community started sort of reassessing some of the older American movies and reappraising a film like Citizen Kane as a classic. And only then were people really revisiting it and giving it, I think, its proper due. But from that point on, thanks in large part to the Sight and Sound poll, which is every 10 years they invite film critics from all over the world to pick their picks for the greatest films of all time. And we're coming up on a new one. They usually do it on the twos, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice.
But almost every year since that poll existed, Citizen Kane has topped that list. And as a result, it has developed this reputation as being the greatest film of all time. But the problem with being called the greatest film of all time is that enough people in the audience are going to approach it as, oh, yeah, what do you got? You know,
Yeah.
like, show me, because we have in our head an idea of what greatness looks like. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily exactly what Citizen Kane is laying down. Another film that I feel has the same problem is The Exorcist, which is
Mhm.
often called the scariest movie of all time. And when I was a kid, I hadn't seen it yet because it was like, it's very R-rated. And
Yeah.
I had kept getting it built up. It's the scariest movie ever. It's the scariest movie ever. And then I finally saw it when I was in high school, and I was like, okay, I get it. But it
I'm
wasn't until
also let's say
yeah.
I was raised Roman Catholic, so
Ah,
it was nonfiction.
yeah, there you go. No, you're bringing something different to it. It actually wasn't until I was an older adult revisiting The Exorcist that I realized that the true horror of The Exorcist isn't Regan's like head spinning around
Mhm.
or any of the violence. It's the true horror is it's a secular horror film. It's the idea of we're living in an increasingly secular time, but what if science can't explain anything? And what if ultimately the truth that we have to deal with is that faith is real, but it's not always happy. And in fact, all of the bad things about faith are true too. And what if we had to reckon with that? And as an adult, as a mature person who is actually struggling to think about how I feel about life, the universe, and everything, that is legitimately terrifying.
Mhm.
But as a teenager, I wasn't really wrestling with that stuff. So I really kind of wasn't ready for it yet. And I feel like Citizen Kane is another one of those things where if you're not open to being on this movie's wavelength, and if you don't appreciate where cinema was at the time it came out and all of the things this movie did that were extremely groundbreaking that we take for granted nowadays, it's easy to look at Citizen Kane and go, that's pretty good. Or
Yeah.
even maybe I don't get it. And I think it's disappointing because you're missing out on something a movie that I think is not only just exciting, I think it is funny. I think it's got everything. It's got romance, it's got tragedy, it's got politics, it's got a musical number, it's got a mystery, it's got
Mhm.
everything.
It has
Um,
some some great lines in it too. I
yeah.
think one of the ones that has really stuck out to me
Hmm.
is when he's interviewing Susan when she finally lets him
Mhm.
um interview her, and they're at her club that she owns, and talking about her opera career and being forced into that. And I actually wrote it down in my notes. Um oh, when she tells him, what do you think he built that opera house? Or what do you think he built that opera house for? I didn't want it. I didn't want to sing. It was his idea. Everything was his idea except my leaving him.
Yeah.
And then she says that line, and then you see the scene where she leaves him,
Mhm.
and you just spent an hour and a half watching this guy get the world thrown at his feet with
Mhm.
everything. And it's the first time that someone tells him no.
Yeah.
And imagine going through your whole life, which makes that next scene where he's tearing apart the room that much more, I think, powerful
Yeah.
in the sense. And then now looking, it's definitely a movie where I look back on it and kind of go back in, and I'm excited to kind of research and learn about, because things are hitting me more the longer I think about it
It's a
and the
movie that
more I think
definitely
about it.
every single time I watch Citizen Kane, I notice something different. That's how impeccably structured it is. And there's a lot of lines of dialogue that sound good the first time you watch them, and then you realize later on that they connect to like 5 other scenes. And it's only when you're rewatching it that you realize the full impact of it. Like the line you were just talking about. There's a line very early in the movie begins with the death of Charles Foster Kane, and then we get this big newsreel montage where we
Right.
see all of Charles Foster Kane's life laid out as quickly as it possibly can be, because it's really complicated. And then over the course of the film, our reporter protagonist interviews a lot of people, and we get a more rich understanding of all of those events. This is a technique that James Cameron would use in Titanic, where at the beginning of Titanic, they just show you, okay, so here's where it hit the iceberg, and here's how it broke down here, and that's when this happened, and then it fell down here, and then the rest of the movie is okay. Yeah, that's what happened, but that's not what it was like.
Right.
So it's all about giving you the full story and then giving you the details. And one of the things they give you in that is a line with Charles Foster Kane, where this is actually I think in the diary shortly afterwards, but he tells the bank manager who raised him, you know, if I hadn't been rich, I might have been a great man.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. The movie is very, very much about wealth. The movie is very, very much about sort of the American form of capitalism, where like we view the acquisition of things as a symbol of our greatness. I mean, look at how we look at
Mhm.
someone like Donald Trump. He literally has a gold hotel. Like some people
Right.
look at that and go, "Wow, what an amazing titan of industry he is." And what Citizen Kane argues is that that's someone who is desperately trying to fill a void that is missing. Something is deeply, permanently, and desperately missing in their life. If you have to build your own private zoo to try to fill it. And that is a great American tragedy. The idea that you could fill the void in your heart, in your soul, the upbringing you didn't have, the love you never acquired, with stuff that you own, to the extent that even in your relationships, you don't truly connect to people. You try to purchase them.
Right.
And then once you purchase them, you expect them to do what you want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they act like human beings and they expect you to actually interact with them as a human being, you realize that you can't do that. All you know is money.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And it always blows my mind too, watching these movies and seeing how it still holds up to this day with that idea of American capitalism and these now billionaires that just like, I feel like a now version of like Charles Foster Kane is Jeff Bezos, when like he went into space and was like, I want to thank all of my employees who made this happen. Like, yeah, your employees that you pay maybe minimum wage, so you can use your wealth to go do this, but they appreciate your thank you. Like, what do you?
Charles Foster Kane is an enormous hypocrite. He uses his platform at a newspaper to try to fight for the everyman without ever, and he fully acknowledges he's rich. Half of the companies that he's railing against, saying that they're hurting the working man, he is a personal investment in.
Right.
But he sees no problem with that whatsoever, because he has no full context. He has no greater understanding of the people than that. All he knows is that when he was a child, he was taken away from his family and given to a bank to raise, which is a strange plot point if you think about it. It's almost like the Truman Show, where this is a human being who, when his mother accidentally was accidentally acquired like the largest gold mine in America or something like that. I think it's like the 6th largest in the world, they say.
Yeah.
Her first thought is, it sucks here. And his father is apparently abusive.
Mm-hmm.
She seems rather emotionally cold, but it's hard to say. A lot of people throw the blame on Charles Foster Kane's life on his mother, because Agnes Moorehead plays her as a very cold person. But if you pay attention to that scene, it's entirely possible that she's just trying to save him from an abusive family situation.
Right. Well,
and
even
so but he doesn't know that. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And the father was like, no, we can't send them away. And then he sees like how much money they're getting. And he's like, okay, fine.
And then
when bags are ready.
And when Charles Foster Kane does it as a little kid, says, I don't want to go with this bank guy, and he shoves him away, like, you're taking me away from my parents. The dad's first thought is he needs a good thrashing, and mom says, well, that's why we're giving him away. So what we have is Charles Foster Kane. This is almost like a fable if you think about it, where here's what would it be like if, since we worship money so much in this country and we're thinking about banks as these like great mighty institutions, what if a bank raised a person? And then that person turned out to be a human being who, like any person who has like domineering parents, is likely to lash out at them. But all they know is money, so they do it with money, and they end up becoming a massive hypocrite and a lonely person.
Right. Where he thinks he's like sticking to him by saying, yeah, I know I have all this wealth now, but I just want to I'm going to take over the newspaper.
Yeah.
Because I think it'd be fun to run a newspaper. And then he just goes in, and then he does shady that whole yellow journalism on top of it, just to keep showing just how terrible of a person.
And indeed, that's something we're still dealing with today. The idea of we're using the mask of journalism to create a form of entertainment, which ostensibly has principles. And I think you could argue that at times in his life, Charles Foster Kane thinks he has principles, but all he really cares about is, it's not even selling newspapers. He wants to be seen as synonymous with that newspaper. He wants everyone in America to buy him and buy into him, which is why the first paper, he like has them redo it over and over again. And then finally, what's the headline news on opening day? It's a statement of principles, which he will eventually defy. And his best friend's going to send him torn up in a letter, because he doesn't actually have them. He has the image of them, but he isn't actually willing to hold up to them.
I mean, how shitty is it that his best friend obviously becomes a drunkard because of everything that's going on, and then has to write this review about his best friend's wife's terrible singing.
Yeah.
Right. And then Kane comes in, takes it from him while he's drunk, and then finishes it to still smear his own wife.
Yeah, I love that scene. That is such a complicated scene because on one hand, it's very, very clear that, you know, if this is his second wife, it's someone that he was caught in a love affair with,
Mm-hmm.
and now he's kind of forced to be with her to save face because it ruined his political career. And there's that whole bit where they're like caught in love nest with Singer, and
Mm-hmm.
Singer's in quotes,
Yep.
and he's trying to remove those quotes. So he's trying to legitimize her, so to legitimize himself. So he buys her an opera house. Bernard Herrmann makes a whole opera, by the way. That's an original opera for the movie.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and it turns out she's fine, but she's not an opera singer. That's a huge ask of anybody. That's really hard to be an opera singer. And he knows it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
He knows it's terrible. He knows she's not good, but he's the only one like clapping like forever, like afterwards. Like he can't bring himself to, and then he must. And then when he sees that Jedediah was actually like, theoretically he shouldn't be doing it at all because he knows her husband. Like as a critic, you should recuse yourself if you can, but that's yellow journalism. No one gives a shit at that paper. But
no such thing as conflict of interest.
no, right? But like he's writing a review and he's being harsh, but no harsher than any other theater critic of the day. And like theater critics were merciless in the 20s and 30s. If you read like the reviews of like Dorothy Parker or Robert Benchley or Alexander Woollcott, if you think critics are mean now, you have no idea what it used to be like. They were brilliant. They could close the theater. They could close a play in a day. It was amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of power. So he was writing the real review. And he expected Charles Foster Kane to love his wife so much that he would actually protect her. And instead, he used Jedediah Leland's writing as an excuse to lash out and be cruel to his own wife. Now, ostensibly, it seems like Kane is like being ethical by writing the real review, but he's also being less of a person. It's a really complicated scene, and there's a lot of layers to it.
It's also feels like he's blaming her for something she didn't want to do.
Yeah.
But I built you this opera house. I got you the singing lessons. I've done all of this for you. And this is how you repay me, by doing a terrible job.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to because it's never his fault. The entire movie, nothing is his fault.
He refuses to accept that possibility. Yeah. He's doing the best he can. And to be fair, he probably is.
Yeah.
He does not have the tools necessary to like emotionally, like nowadays he would please put him in therapy, but like he does not have the tools emotionally to deal with anything that isn't perfect and fawning over him. And yeah, it's interesting to me when Charles Foster Kane meets Susan Alexander, and this is actually something I didn't notice until I'd seen the film a couple of times. The moment when Charles Foster Kane meets Susan Alexander, it's totally by chance. He's standing at the side of the road. A car splashes him with water, and she laughs at him because it's a little silly. And what does he say he was doing? He was going to inspect some property from his family. If he had not met Susan Alexander, he would have looked at all of those boxes that we see at the end of the movie, and he would have found Rosebud.
Oh, yeah.
He was looking that day for some kind of a connection to a past, for family, because he was lonely. And instead, he found Susan Alexander, and she became his Rosebud for a while. And he had to keep her, and he had to protect her, and he had to hide her from the world. This is mine. This is all mine. The world can't have her. And once the world knows that she exists, I have to put her out there. And it's only when she begs him and like almost dies, pushing herself so hard to be the songbird that he paid for, that he realizes, okay, fine, then we're going to imprison ourselves in a giant palace, and I'm not going to let anyone else touch you. And he doesn't know what to do. He can't do it. He can't help himself. And at the end, when she says she'll go away, it seems like for 1 second, his begging her to stay because he desperately needs her. She's almost going to go for it. And then he adds, "You can't do this to me." And she's like, "No, this is not you being genuine. This is not you admitting frailty. This is you saying that I owe you something."
Yes.
And that was the last straw.
And that realization, I think, because Susan's probably one of my favorite characters in this whole film.
She's great.
Because I think she's one of those things, she like said, like she was supposed to be the secret and she didn't want to hurt him and she just wanted to be loved by him. And it was all fine when she could have her own place and do her own thing. And I think that she loved independence enough to try to speak up. But when you're with someone who's that powerful and you lose your voice and you get pushed to the point where you're trying to kill yourself so it can stop, and like having to do all these things to watch her finally kind of get that moment of being like, I'm done, I'm out.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck yes,
It's inspiring
Susan.
is what it is.
It really is.
And she doesn't end up great. She's unhappy.
She doesn't.
She's an
Yeah.
alcoholic, but she, at the very least, she's her own person now. And it's weird. It's sad, really, because she's still trying to make a living as a singer, and he's kind of tainted her.
Yeah.
He's tainted almost everyone he touched.
Yeah.
And it's really really sad. The one person that's funny, the one person who, the older I get, the more I appreciate and respect as a character, is Mr. Bernstein, who was his business manager for many years. And he's this, old man with glasses, and he has the speech in the movie. It's my favorite speech in almost any movie, and it really is, I think, the movie in a nutshell. He's talking about Rosebud, and he has no idea what it is, and he tries to explain to this young reporter, because he's an old man, that you think it's going to be this important thing that's going to unlock his entire life. It's going to completely change everything. And I'll tell you a story about a time when I was on a ferry, and on another ferry, I saw a girl with a white parasol, and I thought she was the prettiest girl I've ever seen. I saw her for a second, and we never talked, and that was the end of that. And not a day goes by that I don't think of her, because that's what life is. Life is an acquisition of memory, and sometimes things are super important to you, and no one else will ever understand their significance. And that's what Rosebud ends up being. It's just a symbol of something he just had fleetingly. And I love Mr. Bernstein. I think Mr. Bernstein is one of the only people in this movie who actually gets out of it okay. Like, he's doing okay financially. He seems reasonably well put together emotionally. He doesn't seem to be lonely. He just, he didn't get overly involved with the shallow billionaire man-child. He was just there. He did his job, and then he stayed out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most normal coming out
in many ways.
in the end, for sure. And then kind of getting into the other aspects of this movie and what makes it so great and why people constantly talk about it. Because I always hear or hear from some people who maybe don't like it as much, that it's a film nerd's film because of the different techniques that were used and everything that kind of, I was even watching and I'm like, how does this look so, like, this movie came out at the same time that Casablanca came out. But these
give or take a couple
scenes
years,
are, but these scenes are like, the way that the focus is and the way that they shot it, I'm like, are they like, did green screens exist back then? Like, how does this look so sharp?
In some cases, the people forget this, or maybe they don't think of it this way. Citizen Kane is a visual effects spectacular. It doesn't have monsters or lasers or anything like that, but it's full of a lot of composite shots, of matte shots. There's a lot of buildings that don't really exist, but people are like standing in a window and they painted it around them. It added a lot of production value. And these are things that are very commonplace today. When you look at like behind the scenes of something like Boba Fett or whatever the Marvel Cinematic Universe is doing, a lot of times they're shooting on a green screen, and that's not dissimilar to some of the stuff that Citizen Kane was doing in order to, and then we'll make it look bigger in post. It was all by design. Orson Welles was also very keen on making sure the movie wasn't photographed like everything was. Casablanca is a great movie, and it's shot beautifully, but it's also shot somewhat conventionally. Michael Curtiz he's a great filmmaker, but he was a hit maker at the time. He was the guy who did The Adventures of Robin Hood. He was a guy who made crowd pleasers. He wasn't necessarily trying actively to push the art form as far as it could go the way that Orson Welles did. And a lot of credit needs to go to a cinematographer, Greg Toland, who sadly, I think, died in like the late 40s. He didn't have as long a career as he should have had. But he is arguably like one of the 2 or 3 greatest cinematographers who ever lived. Almost all of his movies from that era look dramatically different from a lot of the other films, just because he was much more interested in stark lighting. He was much more interested in interesting depths of field. a lot of Citizen Kane is shot from very low angles. And at the time when Citizen Kane was made, a lot of movies didn't have a lot of low angles because a lot of the times you wouldn't see the ceilings of rooms because there was all on a soundstage and you could
Right.
hide microphones and lights there. But Orson Welles wanted us to be looking up at these titans. He wanted the camera to represent not just a viewpoint, but also an interpretation of the events. So we get a lot of that in there. We get a lot of visual effects that are just trying to make everything look as dynamic as humanly possible. Um, the depth of field is often there to sort of keep us uncertain about where we are. A lot of the film is shot in what we call deep focus, where what is in the foreground and what is in the background are both completely in focus, which requires a lot of light, especially at the time. So it's very, very difficult to pull off. But another thing that I always appreciate about Citizen Kane, and something that a lot of movies at the time did do, but a lot of them didn't, and very few movies seem to do today, is there's a really careful consideration of framing and like where the actors are standing. And oftentimes they're standing in sort of a pyramid motif with whoever is narrating this particular chapter in the lower right corner. It's a very particular film. These shots do not happen by accident, and they're there to maximize the experience. I feel like a lot of filmmakers are interested in a very minimalist experience. You are there, documentary feeling. But Orson Welles was a maximalist filmmaker. He wanted to be in your face. He wanted you to know, I'm in a movie right now. I am feeling something completely unique to cinema. And Citizen Kane, it hides behind the simplicity of its story because it is, as complicated as it is, just a story of a guy who owned a newspaper. It's not like,
Yeah.
it's not Gone with the Wind in its epic grandeur, but and thankfully also not in its racism. But it is a visual effects spectacular in its that way, and it is incredibly particular in its shots. And nothing in the movie was half-assed, and I think that's something that we can all appreciate because too many movies are.
Well, yeah, no, for sure. And looking back and like kind of like the research and stuff that I was doing leading up to this and seeing how he got to that point, he got a contract from RKO Pictures that was unheard of at the times.
Yeah.
He's getting 2 films that he has free reign to do whatever he wants as long as it stays under budget. We get this amount, you'll get this amount after that. And he's never directed a movie in his life.
Yeah. He was, to be fair, the toast of Broadway. And people overlooked that because those performances weren't filmed. But for years, Orson Welles, and he's in his early 20s, is doing things that people had never seen before on Broadway. He was doing he did a version of Julius Caesar that was set in contemporary fascist Italy, and it's my understanding that the production design was all done with spotlights. There was no actual sets. Sounds fascinating. I think he directed the first all-black production of Shakespeare with Macbeth.
Oh, wow.
He was seen as a major force in American culture, and indeed that translated to his work on the radio. He would rehearse a play on Broadway, and then because he found out you don't actually have to be sick to be in an ambulance, he would hire an ambulance to drive him across New York to a radio station, and he would get there with seconds to go, and Agnes Moorehead would hand him a thing we're doing the Shadow tonight, you're the Shadow. And he's like, okay, great. And then boom, with no prep, he was the Shadow. So he was also in everyone's homes. So he was like this, it was his first movie, but he wasn't an unknown commodity. He was considered like a wunderkind. And so they wanted him to. Citizen Kane was not the first thing he wanted to do. There was a lot of projects that he almost made instead. He almost made a crime thriller called Smiler with a Knife that was going to star Lucille Ball, but the studio didn't want Lucille Ball because they didn't think she had star power. The idiots. He almost did.
What assholes?
I know, right? He almost did. This. I read the screenplay for this once. It was incredible. He did an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. In which the camera would be the protagonist. It would be all done in first person. And every time the camera, the audience looked in the mirror, they'd see Orson Welles. Which is a fascinating idea. It was a great script. Unfortunately, due to the practicalities of the era, due to the size of the cameras, it was just never going to be feasible. And there was even some talk I heard where they wanted him to do a War of the Worlds movie, but he thought it would look ridiculous on camera. It only makes sense in audio.
Tell that to Tom Cruise.
Tell that to hey, they've done it a couple of times. They're both good movies. But yeah, he ended up doing this instead, and yeah, he got final cut, which is unheard of in the contemporary studio system. I've only maybe heard of like one other filmmaker getting that at the time. And he was able to negotiate that really cool contract. And then when Citizen Kane became this controversial sort of flashpoint where the industry basically, can we afford to piss off Hearst? Can we afford to even release this movie? Was a serious consideration. He lost all of that goodwill.
Right.
And then he was never able to get a movie done again exactly the way he wanted to, starting with his follow-up, The Magnificent Ambersons, which is an amazing movie, even with it being chopped to shreds. They cut tons of material out of that movie, and they reshot the ending to make it, it's not a mega happy ending, but it's definitely happier than the ending that they would have had. And yeah, he was just on the outside of the industry forever. He shot himself in the foot. But there was a moment there where Orson Welles was seen as the next giant thing. He was going to be the next John Ford. He was going to be the next Charlie Chaplin. He was going to be something.
That's wild. Whenever I think of William Randolph Hearst, I think of Robert Duvall in Newsies.
Mm-hmm.
I love that movie so much.
I love that movie too. I grew up watching that movie. I had no idea until relatively recently that Kevin Smets was in it.
Me too.
I love that so much now. I've listened to that soundtrack so many times.
It's so good. It's one of my favorite Christian Bale performances of all time because he's a horrible singer, but he's just in there. He is just going for it.
He's doing fine. He's doing what Marlon Brando did in Guys and Dolls.
And I love that one too.
I love that one too, but Marlon Brando cannot sing. No. He's doing his best. He gets you through the movie, and I like the movie as a whole. But there's a part of you where it's just like, it would have been okay if we dubbed you, Marlon. It would have been fine.
Just fine. No one would have known.
No one complained when Audrey Hepburn was dubbed. It's okay. Just knock yourself out.
Yeah. Oh, Audrey Hepburn. I love her too.
Nah, me too.
No, it is mind blowing what was done with Citizen Kane for sure. Because again, you go and I start looking at the pictures and you see those ceiling shots where the cameras they're actually like cut a hole in the floor.
They did. It's nuts.
To stand there so you can get that angle, and everything has a purpose. And I think that's what's really cool about this movie is every little thing that happens, every fade out,
there's no accident. There's
nothing.
No accident. I remember I was watching this once, and I was watching it with a commentary. I think Roger Ebert did a commentary, and he pointed out like a little thing that I'd never noticed before. I'm like, oh my God, everything in here is important. It's when Kane and Leland, his best friend played by Joseph Cotten, they first go to the newspaper, and they just came out of college. They're best friends for life. Nothing could possibly tear them apart. And they're walking through like the busy newspaper room, and they walk down through the room, and there's a pole just holding up the ceiling that they walk past, and it cuts between them. They walk on either side of it, and Leland is so close to Charles Foster Kane that he backtracks and goes around the pole so the pole cannot come between them. That is such a little tiny detail, and it feels so natural. It doesn't feel forced. It feels like just something this kid would have done, and it's just so great. And then there's like so there's a song in the movie. They're celebrating Charles Foster Kane has purchased the best news team in the world, and they're all having a big party. And then a bunch of chorus line dancers come in, and they do a song. And the song is about Charles Foster Kane.
Of course.
There is a man, a certain man. And then Charles Foster Kane starts doing the dance with them and singing the song. And this is supposed to be a song that they did for the party. And that's when you realize that asshole wrote the song.
What?
He wrote the song, didn't he? Oh my God. What a prick. Like, every movie is endlessly rewarding every single time I watch it.
And I think having this conversation, it'll help me appreciate it even more. Because when I watched it and when it ended, I kind of had that moment of like, okay, that was it. Because again, it's one of those things where you hear about it so much. Like, how could it live up to the hype of what of continuing to hear about it? And there's been multiple podcasts that have covered it, and people talk
Yes.
about it all the time, and you can't
Multiple
really get away
documentaries have
from it.
been made,
Yeah,
movies have been made. I'm curious though, because I want to talk to you because this is something you had never seen before.
right.
Had the ending been ruined for you, did you know what Rosebud was when you press play?
I had no idea.
Wow. Okay. See, I had it ruined for me as a kid by an episode of The Real Ghostbusters. There was an episode of The Real Ghostbusters, this animated series in the 1980s, in which they went to basically the Xanadu, the castle of Charles Foster Kane, and it was being haunted by this ghost who kept saying Rosebud. And then the end of the episode was, are we allowed to talk about the very ending of the movie?
We could
Is that
talk
okay?
about it, yeah.
Okay. And then at
Spoilers,
the end of
people. It's been out since 1941.
if you were wondering, boom, we're going to talk about it now. And then at the end of the episode of The Real Ghostbusters, they find out the ghost just wanted his sled, and the ghost plays with the sled, and that's really, really sweet. And I had seen that before I saw the movie, so I kind of knew it going in. And then you realize, oh, it's a sled. And you realize that the sled kind of isn't important, yet it kind of is. Because when you rewatch the scene, the only scene with the sled,
Mhm.
he's attacking the banker who's going to raise him with it.
Right.
It's not just a symbol of his innocence, it's also a symbol of him fighting back. And
It's
then
like
the next
it's
thing we
his
see is him getting
protector.
another sled and not wanting it. Like he wants his old sled, his fighting
Mhm.
sled. Um, what
It's gonna
was
be
that
my
like
weapon
for
of
you?
choice if I'm ever in a battle royale, is
Right?
my fighting sled.
That would be great. I would love if there was a Schmodown fighting game. I want a sled. Um, what was your reaction when you saw that it was the sled? Did it click? Did it take you a second to put it together? Well, I just want to know because I don't get I never got to have that.
I I I was like, when I saw the sled, I went, "Oh,
Mm,
okay." And, like, the movie ended, and I'm like, and it was a thinker, right? It's not like you
mhm.
said, it's not a sixth sense, he's actually a ghost kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's like, okay, and then you have to kind of think back to, like you said, when did you first see that sled? Okay,
Mhm.
when did he start saying Rosebud? It wasn't until towards the end of the movie where you hear him say it after that kind of first line when he dies,
Yeah,
and
it's the
he
first thing he says
drops
is
the globe.
Rosebud. Yeah, yeah.
But it's because it's after he tears apart the room and people are watching him, and he feels like it's clearly like his life had fallen apart. And then he
Mhm.
finds that snow globe and he picks it up and he says Rosebud, and it's almost like he's looking at, like, that's where he came from. That was
Yeah,
probably
the
he's
cabin.
that moment of, like, that was the happiest moment of my life.
Mhm.
And he's spent his whole entire life trying to capture that happiness
Yeah.
and that innocence, and was never able to. And then not only that, did he even know if with all the shit he had in Xanadu,
Mhm.
did he even realize that Rosebud was there?
I don't think he did. I think he had no idea. I really do.
I don't I think the exact same thing. I think
It's a good point.
he kept buying stuff and buying stuff and buying things to try to capture that joy that he had from this thing.
I honestly, bless you, I've honestly never really thought of that before. The idea that the idea that he might have had absolutely no idea that he owned it. Like it's just there somewhere in an attic and he has no idea. And that just adds this extra layer of tragedy because it was right
Yeah,
there.
the
The
whole
whole
time.
Oh God, he just had bought so much other crap. He
Oh, it
couldn't
makes me
find
wanna
it
cry.
anymore.
You're about to be the
Yeah.
first one to make me cry on this
It's really,
talking
really
about
sad.
this.
It's
It's really
really, really
sad.
sad. It's a beautiful ending, I think. And there's a story with Citizen Kane that there is a plot hole in it.
Okay.
Have you heard about this?
This I have not.
Some people have brought it up that there's a problem with Citizen Kane, and it's a fundamental problem to the story. And the idea is that the movie says that Charles Foster Kane died alone. So who heard him say Rosebud?
Oh.
And a lot of people put out, oh, you're right, the whole movie doesn't work. And I would like to say, for anyone who's listening who may have heard that, this is one of those situations like when people say that like Big Bang Theory, Raiders of the Lost Ark thing, where someone who half watched Raiders of the Lost Ark came up with a theory and people just glommed onto
Uh-huh.
it, even though it wasn't true. Um, I think that there's some people are taking the movie a little literally when they
Okay.
say that Charles Foster Kane died alone. Charles Foster Kane didn't die alone. He had a room full of servants. His butler says
Mhm.
he heard him say it.
Right.
Charles Foster Kane died unloved.
Which is
He died
probably
with no,
worse than dying alone.
I think it is. He died with no friends, no family, no one really to mourn him. He died alone. you can still die alone in like a bed in a hospital with surrounded by nurses or whatever.
Right.
I think that's what we're talking about here, is he died a lonely, sad person, not physically alone. So I don't buy that that's a huge plot hole. I get that interpretation, but I honestly think it's more important to remember that loneliness isn't necessarily literal.
Right. You can be alone with not
Yeah.
like just in everyday life. You can be in
Yeah.
the biggest crowded room imaginable, but if you feel lonely because you don't know anyone there, or there's
Yeah.
not someone there who knows you, or it's empty, how many people know you? He dies surrounded by people he pays to be there.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that's not
exactly.
that is lonely.
And even at the beginning when they show that big newsreel, and here's everyone knew who Charles Foster Kane was. And after we see this 5-minute reel about all the famous stuff he did, there's a whole room full of shadowy men, some of whom are played by actors who will appear later in the movie. Joseph Cotton is in there playing a different
Oh,
character, but he's in
okay.
shadow, so you can't tell. None of those people, and these are all reporters, have any idea what the guy was like.
Right.
They just know of him. They know what he did. They don't know what he felt. They don't know what mattered to him. They have no idea whatsoever.
It's wild. It's
Yeah.
so and it's sad. And it's one of those things where it's like even the comedic parts of this movie
Mhm.
are sad
Mhm.
because of what it means and what he's doing and what he's going through and what he's even when he's the charming brand new newspaper tycoon.
I know.
It's like he's being charming and he has his friends and the world is
Yeah.
falling at his feet and
He's and this is young Orson. He's in his 20s.
he's charming
He's
AF.
a snack. By the
Yes.
way, he is
Oh,
so damn sexy. Like, it's
he is.
amazing he wasn't a bigger
Mhm.
movie star. If you ever get a chance to see the version of Jane Eyre he starred in, I still consider it the best version.
Okay.
But yeah, he is gorgeous and funny. And yeah, you're right. People don't talk about this movie's funny.
It
There's a
is.
lot of humor in it. There's a lot of it's not just this isn't like Last Year at Marienbad where it's like literally like just a riddle to be solved and it's actually kind of emotionally distant and isolating. It's actually rich and full of character and humor and romance and tragedy. And this is just one of those movies, and there aren't enough of them, where I really do feel like you get everything. Because it's kind of everything. It's like the only thing that isn't in this movie is a car chase. And you could argue that it's off screen because that's how his wife and son died.
Yeah.
So like
Exactly.
it's kind of got everything. And I think it's a movie that I really do feel that, you know, a lot of people watch movies very passively. They watch movies to have things happen to them, you know, and that can be fine. I do that sometimes too. But Citizen Kane is a movie that can be watched passively, but if you're really engaged with it and you're thinking about it and you're connecting with the characters and you're trying to feel what they feel and imagine what they're thinking, it is so unbelievably rich. It's a stew with like an infinite amount of spices that all go together well. And if you can just taste them all, it's great.
And I feel like it's going to be one of those movies where like I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night thinking something about it. I'm just going to shoot about it and be like, huh.
Yeah.
Like because you can like you can it is one of those movies where you can watch it and understand what's going on and enjoy it as a film. But it is one that I think is why people kind of talk about it so much is there's so many different themes going on and allegories to life and comparisons and like there's so
and they change over time. Like when you're young,
Yeah.
you associate with young Charles Foster Kane or the younger people that he interacts with, and when you're older, you appreciate them more as you're older. I've seen this movie probably at least 40 times, at least 5 times in theaters, and every time I do, it feels fresh. I get something else out of it. It's a nourishing meal of a movie, and I keep using food metaphors because I think I'm hungry.
I love that. Food metaphors are my favorite kind of metaphors.
Well, there you go.
They're wonderful. Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm glad that I watched this film, and I'm glad it took this project to get me to watch this film because a lot of these movies that I've been watching, I never would have watched if I didn't. My poor husband has been begging me to watch Tremors and Blade Runner, and
I like both those movies. I love Tremors. Tremors is great.
Like, trying to get me to watch so many movies, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I've gotten I've gotten a bigger appreciation for film since, especially in these last couple of years because of things like Schmodown and everyone else that I've done, doing stuff on Flick and Reel on this channel that we're going to be on with the audio podcast and talking with like my friends on there, Jesse and Sean. And
Yeah.
it's given me a better understanding. I'm fallen in love with people like directors like John Carpenter just for the practical effects of what he does. And does he have the greatest movies of all time? Some of them are.
I think some of them are. He's actually one of my favorites, but he's not all of them. He's made
No,
some
not all of
turkeys
them.
and he's
Like,
made
but
some
I
things that are
think
just
like
okay.
when I think of like the epitome of like a god tier practical effects movies, my brain now goes to The Thing, and it never would
Yeah.
have done that had I not
Have you
sat down and
seen
watched it.
Christine yet?
I have seen Christine.
The scene where the car fixes itself in Christine is one of the most
Yes!
incredible things I've ever seen in
It's
any movie. It looks
wild.
so good to this day, and it's all practical. It's just reverse. So damn good.
It's so good.
And here's what I love, because I love what you're doing, and I jumped at the chance to join you for this because I love what you're doing, and I want more people to do it. Because just watching whatever is convenient for you is fine, and we all start doing that. It's when you start digging deeper, like I did as a kid, and you're doing now. We're all doing whenever we get a chance to do it. That the whole like just universe opens up to you, and you realize there's so many more things to love than you had any idea, just because you're only focusing on what's out right now. And it never goes away. And even after you see a lot of the movies that are considered the timeless classics, that's when you realize, okay, now it's time to get into the weird cult stuff, and now it's time to get into the weird chintzy stuff. Like I'm doing a project right now where I'm watching every single movie that stars Elvis Presley.
I love that.
He made maybe 3 good movies. Like he was not a great actor, and most of his movies stink, but they're interesting. It's this weird snapshot of what popular culture was like in the 60s when he was this major box office draw. And these are movies that I probably wouldn't have had the patience for 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But now I'm at that point where I kind of just want to see everything. And I know I'll never have time to see everything, but I'll never see as much as I can unless I just start on the path. And I love it when people are on the path. I love it when people write into my podcast and say, yeah, I'm watching every single Ingmar Bergman film, or I'm watching every single John Carpenter or Sam Raimi film or whatever. And I'm like, this is amazing. I love this. I love that we're all on these journeys and we get to help guide each other along. And it just makes me incredibly happy. And it makes me feel like we're doing something right. So thank you for doing this. And thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. I'm glad you joined me. And it's like, even like it blew my mind when I posted like a month ago, I was watching my first Hitchcock movie of all time. Like I've never watched a Hitchcock movie in my entire life. And I watched Rear Window, and I posted a picture of it from like my TV screen. It's like, oh, watching my first Hitchcock movie, and like just put it up there. And it went viral with like 76,000 impressions. Like
that's a lot.
It's a lot. It got like 1,000 likes, and like
that's great.
It was wild. And it was something I never expected. And I finally learned 3 days later how to mute notifications.
It's very heartening, and I don't think we talk about it enough, because you talk to a lot of people in the industry and they talk about only thing people want to talk about is what's new. They only want to talk about Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, and that's not true. They are maybe more casual people who will connect to that stuff, but the people who really care about the art form of cinema and are really interested in looking backwards, they're not a small number of people, and they're very dedicated. And it's a great community to be a part of. And again, there's always a jerk out there somewhere, but mostly it's just like, oh my God, you're starting Hitchcock. That's amazing. And Rear Window is such a great place to start. That's one of my very favorite, that's seriously in my top 10 favorite movies of all time.
I mean, talk about a snack. Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly.
Oh, Grace Kelly. Oh my God, the camera loved Grace Kelly.
I loved Grace Kelly.
Well, who wouldn't? But my
Jeez
God.
Louise.
That scene where she just like tilts into the camera, she's like climbing on top of him. That's just like, that's
and it's like, of course you hear about how much Alfred Hitchcock was kind of a great piece of shit. It wasn't a great person all the time.
Yeah, he was great.
But his movies are. But then after that, I ended up going and watching Rope, and again, I'm enthralled in this movie, enthralled in the suspense, and then the movie ended. I go, that was all one shot, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he had to fake it because there was only so much room in a camera at the time. But yeah, it was a very, very clever film, and that's also that's actually one of the better examples of queer coding in movies, because back during the production code, you weren't allowed to openly address queer characters, and that was an attempt to do so as closely as they can without actually doing it. Yeah, so many wonderful Hitchcock movies out there. And I hope you watch some more Orson Welles movies. Have you seen any other Orson Welles films yet?
I have not. I need
Okay.
to probably put some more on my
It's
list.
it's tricky because, again, he almost never had a chance to work exactly the way he wanted to work ever again.
Right.
So a lot of his movies are good with a but. Like Magnificent Ambersons is good, but they not only did they chop out, I forget the exact number, it's like 45 minutes of the movie and reshot the ending, but they also burned the original footage, so we'll never find it again.
Well,
So the movie is a Frankenstein monster, but it's still really, really good. But Touch of Evil is still really, really great. I'm trying to remember. F for Fake is really brilliant. And Chimes at Midnight is this amazing Shakespeare movie he did where there's a character named Falstaff who appears in multiple Shakespeare plays. It's like Henry IV, part 1 and 2, and Merry Wives of Windsor, and I think Henry V. And he took all of the scenes with Falstaff from multiple plays and created a new Shakespeare play that was all about Falstaff. And it's incredible. He made a new Shakespeare movie with actual Shakespearean dialogue, all taken from the original text, and it's brilliant. It's a fantastic movie. Yeah, it's so damn cool.
He was a genius. I mean, it's one of those people you feel like you could say was ahead of his time with the stuff that he was doing,
Yeah.
No, I'm so glad. Again, like I don't think if I watched this movie before setting up this project, I would have appreciated it and really like paid attention. If I had just thrown it on, just say, "Oh, I've never seen Citizen Kane. People talk about it, let me watch it," I'd have a completely different feeling.
Yeah, you watch it passively. You're just gonna get an impression of it, but that's
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wasn't bored, so that's good.
Yay. That's great.
So I guess with that, we'll kind of just start wrapping some things up here.
Sure.
Go ahead and I think, I'm just gonna we're talking about doing letterboxed ratings, not full reviews. Maybe we'll get sponsored. Who knows? We're just throwing it out there. Talk about enough. Maybe Letterboxd like, oh, we're listening. You're putting out good shit. Let's go.
Yeah, here's $50,000. But then they might be like, don't come back until it's all been spent.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're like, but you can't curse. I'm out.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, can't do it. I'm trying to like when I do my ratings, doing them as like what the movie is. Like I love Big Trouble in Little China. To me, that is a 5-star movie.
I love that
for
movie.
what it's doing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Or The Rock. Like it's probably one of my favorite Michael Bay movies.
You literally have those posters behind you right now. I totally get. Whereas I have a poster of Troop Beverly Hills and Premium Rush.
Nice.
Just off camera.
Very cool.
Both of them framed. Both of them loving.
Premium Rush. Is that the Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie?
That movie slaps. That movie is great. And Michael Shannon should have been nominated for an Oscar for it. He is that good.
I love Michael Shannon. I don't feel like he gets enough credit for how amazing he is.
Not enough.
But yeah, no, I think for I don't feel like I can go full 5 stars because I would probably need to give it another rewatch to understand like all these nuances. But I'm happy sitting at 4. I think it's a 4-star film.
It's your list. You can do whatever you want with it. It's fine.
This is where Bibbs decides he's never coming back.
No. It's like, I feel like the way you're phrasing it is just like, it's like, is that okay? And I'm like, it's whatever you want it to be. If we had come on here and you had said you hated Citizen Kane, and I would have been very eager to find out why. I would have been very, very, because maybe I have been wrong before. I've talked to people about movies I had very strong opinions about. And then when I saw their interpretation and I thought about it, I was like, oh crap, that doesn't work, does it? So stranger things have happened. So
well, to be fair, when I first was coming in to do this episode with you, like I was at dinner with my husband and my parents, and they're like, "What do you think about it? What did you think?" And I'm like, "It was a sled." And my husband goes, "This is already off to a great start."
Nice.
But then from talking, I start realizing the more nuanced aspects of it, and just start thinking about everything that I saw, and it's just like, yeah. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it was a sled. It was a sled. Yeah.
Got it. What? I figured it out. Solved it. Would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
And your sleds.
Before we wrap up and get out of here, Bibbs, which I've been calling you Bibbs. Is it cool if I call you Bibbs?
Of course it's cool. You can call me Bibbs. Everyone calls me Bibbs.
So glad I asked at the end of all of this.
Hey, you're fine. I would have stopped you. I'm like, I am offended.
William,
Thank you. Yeah,
Mr.
no,
Bibbiani, sir.
don't you dare call me Mr. Bibbiani. Bibbs is
Um,
fine. We're cool.
where can we find you? What you got going on?
Okay, so I write reviews for the Wrap. Not all of them, obviously, but you can find my work there. I also co-host the critically acclaimed network, which is a podcast network consisting of multiple shows hosted by myself and my podcasting partner Whitney Seibold. Um, our shows on that network include Critically Acclaimed, we review new movies; Canceled Too Soon, we review TV shows that lasted one season or less. It's a really great sort of trek through all of television's biggest failures. We also have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/critically acclaimed network. And we have a lot of exclusive shows there, including a show, if you were fond of what we talked about on this episode, a show called Only the Best, where we're reviewing every single film that was ever nominated for Best Picture in chronological order. And we're just about to hit 1948, which was
Wow,
the
that's
year
cool.
The Bishop's Wife and Miracle on 34th Street and Gentleman's Agreement were nominated. So I'm really looking forward to having that. But we're doing that podcast soon. We also have a show called All Our Yesterdays, where we're reviewing every single episode of Star Trek, also in order. We're just about to record an episode about Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and then we're going to get back to doing the rest of Star Trek The Next Generation. We have commentary tracks is there as well. We have trivia nights that we hold with our patrons. So that's patreon.com/critically acclaimed network. We'd love to have you there. And yeah, we also have a soap store with me and my partner, M. Lopez da Silva. However, because Etsy changed its, they changed the cut that they take out. And now it's
Hmm.
much that it's not financially feasible. So the store is currently on hold. We're looking for a new place to host it. Hopefully it won't take that long. But for right now, Salt Cat Soap, which you can follow on Twitter, please follow on Twitter, Salt Cat Soap, all one word, for updates. But for right now, it's currently on hold, but we're going to find a new place for it real soon. So that's going on. But I also want to recommend a book that is, let's see, I'm going to make sure I get it right here. My partner, M. Lopez da Silva, is also a writer.
Okay.
And they contributed to a new book called Your Body Is Not Your Body, a new weird horror anthology to benefit trans youth in Texas. And
Awesome.
the proceeds from it go to organizations that are trying to help trans youth who have, legislation is trying to basically legislate them out of existence in Texas. So this is a weird horror anthology. A lot of queer authors, including my partner, have done a lot of different stories about the trans experience in a horrifying lens. And it's really, really great. And you can find it online. I believe there's a print edition as well. Wherever you can find it, please help out. It would be really, really wonderful if you did. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everyone, please make sure to go check that out.
And also, I'm at William Bibbiani on Twitter, and the show is at Critic Acclaim. There. Now I'm done. That's it. I
Perfect.
promise that's it.
And if you enjoy what you're hearing, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review on whatever audio platform you are listening to us on. If you are listening on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe, like, and hit the little bell for notifications. Anytime we have new content drop here on Flick and Reel, you'll be the first to know about it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments on Citizen Kane. Do you like it? Do you think all of us are insane who do like it? What are your thoughts? Leave me suggestions on what films you would like to have covered on You've Never Seen It. You can follow the show on Twitter at Never Seen It FNR. And you can also follow me at Allison Salamone. And until next time, my friends, be safe and go watch some movies.